today is that you see on this assignment page, this is today's assignment. Yeah, in assignments. Yeah, this is what I did yesterday. And it doesn't come up. See, media is currently being converted. I did that yesterday afternoon. I don't think it's going to show up. You know what I'm saying? And so we're going to go live because what the goal I wanted to have today was these Roman rulers. Because on your homework quiz that you have to turn in by Friday, these guys are on there. And also they're going to later again appear on the test, which finishes this unit on Rome, knowing these Roman rulers. Okay. And once again, these are the major names. These are not all rulers. Goodness. I don't know exactly how many Roman emperors there were. I do know that during the 3rd century AD, there were 25 Roman emperors, of whom only 5 died a natural death. And so that may give you some sense of where we're going here. But anyway, so let's begin by talking about each one. And I'm going to put the edit button on there so I can make my own additions if I want to. And we begin here with Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar actually was never an emperor. Julius Caesar, but he's the most famous of all Romans. Caesar, who was, and I've already talked about this before, famous for conquering Gaul. Actually, Julius Caesar's greatest talent may have been that he was great at publicity. Yeah, and in other words, spreading out rumors about his own greatness. But anyway, he did conquer Gaul, and Gaul is today what is now France, slaughtering some million inhabitants, men, women, and children, in that conquest, which, of course, the Roman Republic thought that was a great victory. In actuality, most of those million people who lived there were people who were still living in a Stone Age technology. And Julius Caesar's Roman legions marched right over through them and destroyed them. But in addition to that, yes, he had a relationship with Cleopatra, which I make reference to in another subject matter. The point of the matter is, though, Caesar became so popular that he became public enemy number one in the Senate. The Senate, remember the 300 members of the Senate, Rome is still a republic. The Senate became very afraid that this guy, Julius Caesar, was going to take over, which he probably was. And so they told Julius Caesar on his last approach to Rome, he says, when you come, leave your army at the Rubicon River. And Julius Caesar said, nobody's going to tell me what to do with my army. And so he crossed the Rubicon. Rubicon. Yeah, there's a saying that when you cross the Rubicon, you have gone past a point of no return. And for those of you who like automobiles, the Jeep, there is a model called the Rubicon. And that's not, I hate that, of course. That name is not a coincidence. There is a Rubicon Jeep that, yeah. But anyway, so Caesar, he does all these things. He has this affair with this foreign witch, Cleopatra, even though he's married. And of course, the members of the Senate talk about him like his dog. Oh, he's going off with this foreign woman and he's married. Well, trust me, Romans had no compunction about doing such things. And remember, this was a society, Julius Caesar was every man's woman and every woman's man, kind of person. And so, yeah. But when he comes back to the Senate, he is met by 27 of his closest friends who immediately stab him to death 27 times. And the last was his friend Brutus, et tu, Brute. And so, he's murdered. And of course, this causes a great uproar because Julius Caesar is very popular. Causes a great uproar amongst the people, and also causes a civil war in Rome, another one, that lasts 11 years. Out of this civil war will come this guy, Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar, he is the adopted grandnephew of Julius Caesar. His real name is, I should have put his full name. Octavian Augustus. Then he takes on the name Caesar because, he wants people to identify him with his dead adopted uncle, which will give him popularity. Octavian Augustus Caesar, he is the one who finally defeats Mark Antony in Egypt. Antony commits suicide, and then he goes to snatch up Cleopatra. Well, to finish the story about Cleopatra, she was not going to go back to Rome, not with Octavian Augustus, not as a prisoner, because Octavian Augustus, had he captured Cleopatra, he intended to do with her what Roman rulers like to do with defeated leaders. They bring them back to Rome for the purpose of making a public spectacle of them, for the purpose of, for example, putting them in the Colosseum to be eaten by lions and let everybody enjoy it. So she knew, and so she wasn't going to let that happen to her. Interesting woman, though. So she's sitting there. She knows that Octavian's closing in on her. And so she has her servants start bringing up prisoners. And she tries out poisons on the prisoners. And she wanted to gauge the reactions of the poisons, whether, for example, they cause too much vomiting or retching or, violent reactions, or they didn't work fast enough or something of that nature. And she didn't like any of the poisons. And so she was quite alive when Octavian shows up. And Octavian has her locked, in this mausoleum. And the mausoleum is a sealed room. She intended to die in that room and then be buried in that room, this mausoleum, and have it sealed up. And so he positions guards outside the room. And when they go in to check on her the next morning, they find her quite dead. And they do find the marks of an asp, a snake. The legend was that she had an asp smuggled in a fruit basket. And she then allows the asp to bite her. The thing was, they searched the entire mausoleum. It's stone. It's sealed. And they found nothing. And so Octavian was all hacked off about this because he was denied his trophy. And so he has a statue made of her out of marble, and it's lying across a bed. And then there's a gold asp snake wrapped around her arm, and they take that back to Rome. Well, anyway, so Octavian becomes the first imperator or emperor of Rome, and he takes on the title of Caesar. From this point on, all Roman rulers will bear the title Caesar and will be greeted, "Hail Caesar," a raising of the right hand like this. And if you ever wonder, that of course is Heil Hitler, it's a symbol of virility. Do I have to explain this any further? Virility? Maleness. Yeah, that's exactly what it's supposed to mean. The Romans were all about virility. And so that salute, that extended hand, that's what it means. And anyway, so Octavian was then succeeded by his his uncle Tiberius, not his uncle, his nephew, sorry, his nephew Tiberius, who will rule for only a short time because one morning Tiberius woke up smothered to death. Actually, he didn't wake up, but he was smothered to death by a pillow, which, once again, not uncommon at all. The leading candidate for the murder of Tiberius was his nephew, Caligula. Now, in all measures of depravity, if you want to look up sickos, people who, stretch all bounds of human decency. In fact, he had no decency, this guy, Caligula. He was a Roman emperor who, his own grandmother committed suicide because of him, because she couldn't stand to be around him. He marries his sister, by the way, which actually was not that uncommon, but still kind of marries his sister. And then one of the things he liked to do was he liked to go to weddings and treat himself first to the bride and or groom in the wedding. He had this demonic laughter and had a terrible sense of vengeance for just the slightest indignation. For example, that wife of his, when they were at parties, he would walk around and he would, laugh and put his hands around her neck and say, off comes this pretty little head whenever I give the word. Yeah, that was him. And, he, one time he caught a soldier who was asleep. One of the, and let's write a word down here, shall we? The word is, boys and girls, Praetorian, Praetorian guards. Praetorian guards were like the bodyguards of they were like Secret Service. Their job was to guard the life of the emperor. Praetorian guards, like the emperor, wore the color purple. It was in Rome, purple was the color of royalty, which, by the way, is a custom that has descended through history. But anyway, so Caligula found this one guy fallen asleep, one of his guards, and he had him killed by cutting him thousands of times all over his body so that he would bleed out so slowly. Another guard he found drunk on the job, and Caligula had him, let's say he had a certain part of his anatomy tied up, and then force-fed the guy wine until literally he burst and died that way. But probably, and Caligula, he was just so stupid. For example, to see the emperor, you had to get past the Praetorian Guard. And to get past the Praetorian Guard, you had to give the guard a password. And Caligula set the password, and it changed every day. And that's fine, except for one thing. Caligula thought it was the funniest thing in the world to give the guards a password that when the person coming in would say it, it insulted the guard, to say something terrible about the guard who's guarding your life. And Caligula would sit there and listen to it and start howling, laughing, thinking it was the funniest thing in the world, to the person who was responsible for saving your life. That comes in the category of not very smart. In fact, it does come back to bite him. One day, during one of the festivals that they had, pagan festival. In fact, I think it was a festival to the god Dionysus, the god of partying. There was a play being performed. Caligula was in attendance to the play, and the play called for a human sacrifice on stage. And of course, Caligula, me, volunteers because he wants to be able to do it. And so he goes up there, performs the human sacrifice. There's a great spatter of blood, and Caligula gets it all over himself. And so he wants to go back to his palace, take a bath. I mean, the Romans were clean people. So he's walking along the secret passageway between the theater and the palace. And along the way, he comes in front with it. The guard's name was Gaius Chira. And Gaius Chira and two of his friends stabbed Caligula to death. And here's the bad thing. When news began to spread that Caligula was dead, because Caligula was a jerk, and everybody hated him. Nobody said anything. Nobody said, yeah, ding dong, the witch is dead. Nothing like that, because they were afraid that it might be a trick. That, Caligula is killed. People go, yeah. And then Caligula pops up and has them all executed. So nobody said anything until they saw some of the Praetorian Guard snatch up Caligula's daughter publicly and take her and slam her against a wall until her head exploded, that they figured, yeah, he must be dead. Now, that same Praetorian Guard went all through the palace, killing all the relatives of Caligula, until they got to Claudius. Now, Claudius was an interesting guy. He walked with a limp. He spoke with a lisp. And Caligula loved to make fun of the guy. In fact, Caligula killed many of his relatives, but they considered Claudius too stupid to go to the bother of killing him. And so they didn't. They would just make fun of him. And then when Claudius hears about, the Praetorian Guard running through killing everybody, he's hiding it behind a curtain in his own room. And the soldiers come into his room. He's back there hiding. They can see his feet. And so they pull back the curtain and then say, "Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you." And so Claudius becomes the new emperor. And everybody had always thought Claudius was stupid. Well, that just shows you how deceiving looks are. Claudius actually is a very competent, very intelligent, very progressive emperor. For example, in your writing, Claudius built the Aqua Claudia, which in Latin means the water of Claudius. It was a 50-mile aqueduct that brought fresh water from a source 50 miles away into the city of Rome, so that there was fresh running water in all the fountains. Many of the homes of the more wealthy had indoor plumbing. There was public toilets. Water was pumped, and it could be pumped in. And, they planned it so the water sources here, the cities here, the water would always have water pressure. I mean, the Romans could do such incredible things, like, for example, the Colosseum. The Roman Colosseum, sometimes they would flood it and stage sea battles on the floor of the Colosseum. They had that much water and that much ingenuity. Yeah, the Roman Colosseum, which I shouldn't even be talking about now, but the Roman Colosseum held 50,000 people, and it could be filled and or emptied in 20 minutes. You had to have tickets to sit down. All the gates were numbered. It's very, very, very much like a modern sports coliseum. It had water fountains. It had toilets inside. I mean, anyway, it even had a roof over the head, a retractable roof that, on hot days, they could pull these sail-like things over the crowd to keep the crowd in the shade, but the light on the participants. And that's something I should not talk about now. I need to talk about that was about Vespasian. But anyway, yeah. But Claudius did have a weakness. His weakness was his wife. His wife's name was Agrippina. Yes, and Agrippina was a cousin of Caligula, and she was his wife. Does it have two P's? Maybe it does. Yeah, it does. She was his wife, but she had a son from a previous marriage. That son's name was Nero, and she wanted Nero to be the next emperor. And she could get next to Claudius, and she could talk to him and persuade him. And when she did it, she finally actually succeeded in having Nero put ahead in the ascendancy to the throne of Claudius's own son. And then, after she did that, it was time to get rid of Claudius. She poisoned him, fed him poisoned mushrooms. He couldn't even utter any of his last words. He gagged to death on poisoned mushrooms. But that made Nero the new emperor. Now, Nero is a case study in where Rome went wrong. Yeah. First of all, Nero was rather vain, fancied himself an actor. In fact, a lot of times when he was emperor, he would toss off his emperor's garb, his purple robe, slip into the red light district of the city, where, yes, all the brothels were, all the bars were, and all the theaters were. And he would act in plays, get involved in plays, and also get involved in bar fights. And interestingly enough, in these bar fights, he would never retaliate. In other words, when he went back to being emperor, he would not go seek out that person that beat the crap out of him and execute him or anything like that. He just went back to being an emperor. But anyway, Nero was very, he and his mother had arranged for him to be the emperor. And his mother, Agrippina, thought that Nero would be emperor and she'd be empress. You know, but Nero, he was not down with that. And eventually she nagged him so much that he had his Praetorian guard kill her. She heard they were coming. And when the Praetorians entered the room, she said, "Here, stab me here. This is what bore Nero." And they did. But anyway, Nero slips into madness. Pardon me. Nero actually is famous for two things. Number one, and I grew up in churches, and I always heard, Nero was the great persecutor of Christians. And I'm not saying the guy was a wonderful person, because he wasn't. He was a real jerk. But I'm not sure that he needed to get credit for the persecution of Christians as much as he did, because you have to do the math. If you believe that Christ was born in the year 1 AD or thereabouts, then he lived to be 33. That makes him dead about 34, 35, 36, 37 AD. Nero becomes emperor in 70 AD. The numbers don't match up. In 30 some odd years, Christianity doesn't have the time to grow from a religion of 12 disciples into large numbers that could be then massacred in the games, or persecuted, or burned, or whatever. And I'm not sure that Nero deserves the credit he does for being the great Christian killer. The other thing, and this is more factual, that Rome had a tremendous fire when Nero was emperor, and what the rumor was that Nero wanted to build himself a brand new palace, a beautiful palace. And the land, which was, land in Rome was prime real estate. And the land he wanted to build it on was already occupied. And so one night, about a quarter of Rome, 25% of Rome, burned to the ground. Oddly enough, it was the very property that Nero wanted to build his new palace on. And according to the legend, Nero played a fiddle. Of course, that's a lie. He would not have played a fiddle. He would have played a lyre, Lyre. A harp, a small harp-like instrument. He did do that, played the liar, while Rome burned. And anyway, and he builds this magnificent palace. And here's the thing, and it's a beautiful palace. They know because after Nero dies, they bury the thing. Yeah, after Nero dies, they hate the guy so much they just bury it. And inside the interior of the palace is wonderfully preserved and won't be found for nearly 1,500 years later. And you see all the decorations on the inside. But yeah, well, Nero, like all the other emperors, eventually runs out of time, and eventually the Praetorian Guard turns on him. And Nero is, holed up, and he asks his servant who's with him, hands him a knife and says, "Please stab me." And the servant says, "I ain't doing that." And Nero then eventually stabs himself in the throat. But according to the legend, his last words were, "What a great actor the world loses in me." And so that takes us to the next emperor. This will be the first emperor who is not of the family of Julius Caesar. His name was Titus. He was an army officer. He was no nonsense. He didn't, do all the stuff that the others did. He was much more focused on governing Rome. And Rome will grow under his tutelage, including Rome will conquer what we now call Israel, Palestine. And the conqueror of Rome will be this guy, the son of Titus, Vespasian. And when he conquers Jerusalem, he sacks the temple of Jerusalem, the temple of Solomon. The temple, and this temple the Jews built was full of gold, jewels, precious stones, and all this kind of thing. And the Romans sacked the temple, stripped it of all of its valuables, carted off many of the Jews back to Rome, and Vespasian will take all those riches. And I always thought this was an interesting story. He takes all those riches back to Rome and uses it to finance the building of the Colosseum. And the slaves who build the Colosseum, many of them are the Jews who were captured in the conquest of Rome. And so they build this Colosseum. And like I was telling you before, the Colosseum was a marvel. Could hold 50,000 people. Like I said, could be flooded to host aqua battles, naval battles. Of course, had chambers below where you had the animals and the gladiators. That's where they kept them until they were brought up. It had running water. It had a canopy that could be brought up and retracted on hot days or cold days for the comfort of the spectators. And it was one of those things that if you're a Roman citizen, you could get a ticket. But yeah, Vespasian built the Colosseum. Now, after Vespasian, Rome goes through some bad rulers until this next guy. His name is Hadrian. Now, no, I skipped one. Vespasian, 114 AD. His name, yes, very good. Thank you. Trajan. Trajan will rule the Roman Empire in the year 114 AD. And Trajan will rule Rome at its greatest size. Rome will stretch from Scotland all the way across all of Europe, all the way across North Africa to the Persian Gulf, to where Iraq and Iran are today, will be controlled by the Romans. The Romans will have conquered the Dacians of Eastern Europe and the Parthians of what is now Iraq, and all those under the control of one government, one man. And when they conquered the Dacians, they took home 70 tons of gold, which of course they filled the Roman treasury with. They also took home lots of slaves. Fact of the matter is, and you're writing, 1 in 3 people in the Roman Empire, 1 in 3 were slaves. The Romans enslaved. I mean, it's how do you think they built all that stuff? You didn't think they did it, did you? Yeah, the Romans enslaved much of the people under their control. 1/3 of Rome were slaves. And most of those slaves, here's the thing, most of those slaves looked like this guy. They came from Eastern Europe. They were, in fact, Russians. They were Poles. They were Serbs. They were Czechs, all of whom, as a group, the Romans simply referred to as Slavs, S-L-A-V, which is the Latin word for slave. Today, Russians, Poles, Czechs, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes are all still part of a family called Slavs, which means slave. Yes, slaves, before the advent of the colonial period, slaves in Europe were predominantly white, for what that's worth. Yeah, associating being of African descent and being a slave doesn't come about until the colonial period. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. So Trajan controls Rome at its greatest height. Hadrian will be the next great emperor. They call him Hadrian the Builder because Hadrian will build, he'll build Hadrian's Wall, which is an 85-mile wall in what is now Scotland to keep the Scots from coming down into the Roman Empire. The Picts, they call them, the wildlings, if you will. Yes. And he also built a building called, that's right here, the Pantheon. The Pantheon, and I actually have a picture of the Pantheon. Why did you? Yes, the Pantheon Rome, there's Trajan, there it is. The Pantheon, and I took that picture in 1989. The Pantheon is the most perfect structure in the ancient world. Why is it perfect? Because it was constructed in such a way that there is a sphere inside of it. And this dome that you see up here, this dome, which is made of concrete, totally unsupported. In other words, you have a dome this tall, made of concrete, and it has no columns, no support. And how did the Romans engineer that? And it's really cool the way they engineered it. And not only that, at the very top of this dome is an opening called an oculus, which allows light in. Now, the other thing about the Pantheon, it is the oldest building on the planet that is still used for its original purpose. The Pantheon was built by Hadrian, beautifully inlined with precious stones and tiles. So beautiful that when the barbarians sacked the rest of the city of Rome, they left the Pantheon alone. But the Pantheon was built as a temple of worship for pagan gods. Today, it's a functioning Roman Catholic church. Yes. Yeah, so he was called Hadrian, and yeah, he built more than that. He built aqueducts, he built roads, he built bridges. Yes, he was called Hadrian the Builder. His philosophy was Roman soldiers doing nothing are trouble. So let's build stuff. Yeah, and once again, remember the Romans built 22,000 miles of roads across Europe. That during the days of the Pax Romana, that a person could travel faster across Europe, one end of Europe to the other, during the Pax Romana than any time until the invention of the railroad. After Rome goes away, the roads go away, it becomes very difficult to traverse Rome or Europe with weather and bad roads and highwaymen, robbers. All right, Marcus Aurelius. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, you know Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. hopefully, when we come back January the 4th, we'll take time out to watch the film Gladiator, which is another of my favorite films. If you liked Miss Wynn, if you liked Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, just a little, then you're going to love Gladiator, because the evil person in Gladiator is much more evil. Yes. And he's a real person, Commodus. But Marcus Aurelius is the father of Commodus. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and I put him in here because he was a scholar of the philosophy of Stoicism. He wrote a book called Meditations, which was about Stoic philosophy. Thank you very much. Yes, which was about Stoic philosophy. Yeah, which we'll talk about more later. But yeah, and he's in there because Marcus Aurelius goes out of power in 180 AD. 180 AD is the end of the Pax Romana, a Roman peace, which is another word on your, yes. And finally, this last guy, Caracalla, jerk. He was emperor in the last declining days of the Roman Empire. What he did was that he built the great baths of Caracalla. Yeah, he built these baths that were so impressive. They had 7 pools of water for Romans, and I mean big pools for Romans to come and bathe in. And the pools ranged in temperature from almost scalding to ice bone cold chilling. And that's what you would do. You would go jump into the hot bath, and while you were there, servants would give you oils, and you rub all the oils all over your body. You then scrape the oils off your body. The dirt on your body adheres to the oil, and then you jump in the water, and you bathe off. And then as you move down, you start spending more time in the water and having conversation, watching people drinking alcohol, and probably having sex across the pool, because the Romans, nudity wasn't a thing. So men and women used the pool together. Nudity wasn't a deal. And so, yeah. And those, you say, how did they heat those pools? Well, underneath the floor, they had a network of servants and also boilers where they would heat the water. And the smoke never came upstairs. It exited out along the side. And of course, the servants had to suck in a lot of smoke. All right, today's lecture has been about Roman emperors, and I thank you for your patience. This information will help you when you do that assignment of taking that quiz. It will also help you when we take the test finally. I'm going to stop sharing now.